Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I'm Rizvi and I represent Youth Cancer Europe. Youth Cancer Europe is a network of hundreds of thousands of young people under the age of 40 in Europe with a history of cancer. In 2018 in Brussels, we launched our white paper on 5 calls to action, talking about financial discrimination, cross-border healthcare, fertility, mental health, and dental care and reconstructive surgery. So that I don't repeat other speakers, today I will speak and focus on mental health and fertility. Fertility is an important issue for many young cancer survivors and perhaps the most life-altering late effect of cancer treatment, affecting the survivor's body image, sexuality, dating relationships, marriage patterns, and sense of well-being, starts our white paper's chapter on fertility. Still, a very recent survey done by ESMO and SIOP Europe reveals that across the board, 38% of young people of reproductive age have not met any fertility counselors, nor even met or heard about oncofertility during their cancer journey. And I would like to bring your attention to the blue columns in Southern Europe and Eastern Europe, where we see that this value is at 76% in Eastern Europe. While we appreciate that the UN Sustainable Development Goals very specifically commits by 2030 to ensure universal access to sexual and reproductive healthcare services and the integration of reproductive health into national strategies and programs. And we were very pleased to see in the press release about the 2021-2027 EU Health Programme, specifically mentioning access to sexual and reproductive health care, next to the support committed to Europe's fight against cancer. We hope that this topic is going to be very specifically described in Europe's Beating Cancer Plan. In addition to this, I would like to bring your attention to something else as well. Seeing that most adoption agencies do not have specific policies in place for prospective parents with a cancer history wanting to adopt, our cancer survivors are met with varying forms of formal and informal discrimination across the EU when wanting to adopt children. This is the kind of discrimination that also needs to be considered when talking about the right to be forgotten. So what do we ask? We ask for the right to fertility counselling, as simple as that may sound, for all our citizens across Europe facing cancer, and the right to fertility preservation, and of course the right to fertility treatment to be included in health insurance terms and eventually in national health insurance plans, and for the right to be forgotten. Late effect surveillance and long-term follow-up, therefore, must be a very important and integral part of Europe's Beating Cancer Plan. And I would like to give a good example where European Union funding has financed very important academic research and the publication of recommendations on, for example, breast cancer surveillance and all the other late effects that we are listing on this slide for long-term follow-up on the effects of pediatric and young adult cancer treatment. However, the step that is missing is for these recommendations to be adopted by national societies and for these guidelines to be translated into care delivery strategies on a national level. And for my next topic, chronic fatigue, depression, extreme anxiety, panic attacks, post-traumatic stress disorder, there is enough anecdotal and clinical evidence to know that these mental health effects, side effects and late effects, follow a cancer survivor many times for life. So what do we ask? Again, we very specifically would like to require that mental health support for cancer patients and their caregivers are a part of routine care. And we need the costs of long-term psychological support, psychotherapy, and psychiatric care to be covered within health insurers programs. We know that health in all policies and generally the EU health policy and such initiatives will provide the legislative framework and the regulatory framework for more health in the EU and for better health policies. But I would really like to add that in order for these initiatives to become part of our cancer patients' daily reality on the national level, it is absolutely essential that EU funding instruments are to be extended to the capacity building of patient organizations in order to be able to advocate on member state level. We're looking forward to Europe's Beating Cancer Plan. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you as well for the very specific questions. I will take the questions concerning childhood cancer and young adult, teenage, and all the way up to young adult, as that is my competence. And I also very specifically would like to thank Tilly Matz and Monica Samado for the questions. First of all, in a very short answer, I would like to again point out Youth Cancer Europe's white paper and our 5 calls to action, which covers some of the questions that you had very specifically on patient mobility and cross-border healthcare. And this white paper is not general, it is full of very specific recommendations on how the EU could intervene and how the EU and European Parliament and European Commission could help provide the legislative and the regulatory framework for some of these major issues and big problems to find resolutions and answers. Back to a very important question on clinical trials and on new therapies. I would like to give you a quote from one of our patients that says, "Innovation has no value to patients at all if it is not accessible." And interestingly enough, in previous conversations a couple of weeks back, when we were discussing with the European Commission, for example, the pharmaceutical strategy and also the review of the pediatric regulation, access has come up as a very important issue. And I believe that the treaty and reference to the European single market is where we need to look for solutions to actually create the kind of legislation that will provide the basis for the kind of injustices, for correcting the kind of injustices that are happening across Europe for many of our patients coming from less advanced countries. Having said that, when it comes to mental health, and now I'm going to refer to another question asked, it is actually a pity that some of the most advanced EU countries take very poor care of their own cancer survivors. And we have to look at this, as we have heard it today, that today's childhood, teenage, and young adult cancer patients are tomorrow's economic contributors. We have 12 to 14 million cancer survivors in Europe, so we ought to take better care of them. And there is one more thing that I would like to answer to one of the earlier contributions by one of the MEPs talking about long-term follow-up care and the survivorship passport. I'm also one of the directors of PanCare that has been running the survivorship passport project from EU funding, and it's an extremely important project. Having said that, it is wrong to assume that long-term follow-up and survivorship passport is available for our patients, because it is not. It is in only very, very few countries of Europe where our survivors have access to it, especially in an electronic format. And in today's Europe, where patient mobility is the norm, as we have said, it is unacceptable that patients don't have an electronic record of their cancer and a cancer therapy and cancer treatment history. So very specifically, long-term follow-up, late effect screening, and that just doesn't mean going for a blood test once a year. That means actually screening for adverse effects on hearing, on the heart, on mental health later on, and cognitive capacities 10, 15 years on after cancer treatment is absolutely essential, and a modern Europe should have the kind of legal framework that provides for this becoming a reality. And back to my last slide, as I have finished my speech earlier on today, unless we empower cancer patient organizations to lobby on the national level, all of these wonderful European initiatives will take another decade or 2 or 3 and eons to become a reality, because it is only on the national level that some of these very important goals that we have for Europe's cancer patients will become a reality.